So this is Entrepreneurship and Small Business Management. And today's lecture is covering the business plan. So this is something that people generally are pretty interested in, and the reason is a lot of people have business ideas, but don't know where to start with a business plan. So as always, I will get a chatbot to filter and capture any questions, but until then, feel free to put your questions in the chat as I go along, and as I move from section to section, I'll be working through that, right? So our aim today is to cover the purpose of a business plan. The purpose of a business plan. So in that, we'll go over how to create a business plan, how to measure and think about each of the sections, what you can do, and everything else like that. So first off, what is a business plan? What is a business plan? And in short, this is a document intended to communicate your business idea, to communicate the following, right? So it's going to communicate where you are, right? So point A is where you are. Whether you just came up with the idea, whether you've spoken to customers, whether you've been in operations for 5 years, whatever it is that you think is important to cover in a business plan and whatever it is you're trying to communicate. And B, where you're going, right? So this is where you want to get. The reason you're creating a business plan, how you're going to get there, is the middle, right? How is the middle, right? And so we're going to go over how you try to capture these things into a single document, right? So the first thing you need to understand, and the first thing that's very important, is that a business plan is not a business, right? No one is going to give you money for a great idea unless it's just the most proven and basic thing, and that's that, right? So a business plan is simply there to help facilitate your explanation of the business, right? So the first thing you want to make sure, even before you write a business plan, is that your business aligns with your personal goals, right? Aligns with your personal goals, right? And this is going to be a prevailing theme throughout business, because unless something aligns with your personal goals, it's not going to work. So if your goal is to spend a lot of time with your family, starting a business that's going to be taking 16 hours a day for the next 10 years is probably not the best thing for you to do. And you're not going to succeed because it's going to conflict with your personal goals. If your personal goals are to get extremely rich, starting a business that's going to be a non-for-profit is not going to be on your agenda, and so on and so forth. So one of the ideas that a business plan helps flesh out is not only to communicate it to someone else, but it allows you to ask difficult questions of yourself about the business. Right? So you want to talk about the opportunity in your business plan. So what is the overall opportunity of what you're doing? Right? Is it a market opportunity? Is it new technology? Whatever it is. You want to talk about your approach. Right? How are you approaching this opportunity? How are you going to get it there? How are you going to take advantage of it? Why are you making something better than what's already out there? Right? And then finally, you want to talk about your factors of success. Now, this is going to be a misnomer, right? The factor of success is that I have a bunch of customers, they love my product, and it makes me a bunch of money. That's not a great factor of success, right? So factors of success is actually going to be indicating where you can fail, right? Where and how you can fail. And we're going to talk about transparency in business plans. But the basic idea is that it's a document that helps both you, your investors, and the people in the company understand where you're headed, right? So the first thing you need to ask yourself, even before you've started, is, do you need a business plan? Do you need a business plan? And the reason you want to ask that question is because there's no direct correlation between a business plan and business success. Business plan does not equal success. Right? It simply doesn't. You can be just as successful without a business plan. A business plan can sometimes steer you wrong if made for the wrong reasons or adhered to too closely, right? So it does not equal success. And the reason it doesn't equal success is unless you're starting a business writing business, a business plan writing business, writing does not equal implementation. right? Implementation is way more important, and perhaps it's not equal, it's not there, but it's less important than implementation, right? So if you're able to implement your idea today, you're much better off doing the implementation than doing writing, right? But there are a lot of reasons to work on a business plan, right? So one of the things you want to try to find is a balance. A balance between planning and implementing. If you work for 25 years on a business plan, even if you work for 6 months on a business plan and you haven't implemented anything, that's not going to lead to a lot of success. As a matter of fact, most of what you'll find is that the second that business plan comes out of the printer, it's obsolete. The second you go talk to a customer and they're like, your product's pretty good, but I'm not willing to pay for it. Or I'm willing to pay for it, just not that much. Or whatever it is that you're seeing, that's going to be the balance that you're trying to strike, right? Is how much planning are you doing and how much implementing are you doing? And as a rule, if you're spending more time on planning than implementing, you're probably not going to be successful because time is extremely valuable. And it's even more valuable for a startup. And we'll talk about why that is, right? The top 2 reasons that business plans kind of lead to failure is a failure to pivot. And what that means is if you have a business plan and you say, I'm going to make a smartphone that fits in the palm of your hand, right? And you go out to your customers and your customers are like, this is actually a pretty interesting product, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to be able to use a calculator on it. And your business plan doesn't say, well, there's a calculator on this smartphone, right? And so you have to be able to pivot, right? They may actually say that they don't want it to be palm size. They want it to be slightly larger. They want it to fit in 2 hands, right? Whatever your market is, you have to be able to pivot in order to satisfy its needs, right? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how great your idea is or how good you think it is. It's how good your customers think it is, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing that's important is capital is king. Right? And what that means is you're going to have a certain amount of capital available for starting your company. Whether that's an extra 3 months of living expenses, whether that's $100 million, whether that's $1 million loan, whatever it is that you have available is going to decide how long you can operate and how quickly you can expand, right? And so that's important to remember. So if you're wasting your hard-earned money sitting around planning, you're probably not going to get very far. Okay? So that's there. The second piece of needing a business plan is that if this is your first time entering a business, if you have some idea or, some concept that you'd like to test, it's going to be an acid test for your business. And what that means is it's going to help you ask the questions that need to be asked in order to solidify whether or not this is worth pursuing, right? So it's an acid test. And some of the questions you'll be forced to answer by creating a business plan is, why does this need exist, right? The need for what I'm making. Why does it exist? Right? Are people unsatisfied with their phone service? Are people paying too much for pharmaceuticals? Whatever it is, why does it exist? Right? You'll be forced to answer, who is your target audience? Right? I'll write that as, who is your target? Are you targeting large corporations? Are you targeting low-income individuals? Are you targeting people in your neighborhood? Are you targeting people that use Macs and want to switch to Windows, or the other way around? Right? Who is your target audience? Right? The next question is, how are you different? How are you different? So 95% of the time, your business idea will already exist in some form, right? Or more precisely, the problem that you're solving will already be solved in some form. Now, that's not always adequate, right? Sometimes the solution is completely inadequate, and what you'll find is that you need to solve it again in order to make the solution more adequate or more correct, right? And so the question is, how are you different from the other people solving this problem, right? The next question is, how do you become profitable? Now, not-for-profits often are categorized as companies that don't have to be profitable. That's nonsense, right? Even not-for-profits have to be profitable because, like we said, capital is king. So if you don't have the money to keep going, and you're not profitable, if you're not making even slightly more, or at least as much as you need to keep operating, you're not serving your customers, and you eventually will go out of business because you'll run out of money, right? So these are the kind of the major questions that you're going to be asking, right? So why does it exist? Is there a reason for it to exist? And if there isn't, it's a good time to start revising your idea, right? Who is your target? If you can't find your target audience, if you can't figure out who it is that your audience is, that's a problem, right? How are you different? If you don't have any differentiating factors, then someone that's established in the industry is going to do better. And how to become profitable, if you have no way of charging for your services and making money on them, then it's very unlikely that your services will be sustainable over time, right? So once you've decided to do a business plan, you have to think about your audience, right? And this is true with any document or speech or anything else that you prepare, right? So to give you a personal example, when I write these lectures, I think about my audience. So I think about who's watching, I think about what they know already, what they might not know, and one of the reasons that I think Twitch is kind of a solid platform for doing this is that I have to do a little less guesswork because people are able to ask questions, right? So I may use terminology that's unfamiliar. I may go too fast or skip over something that I think is common knowledge that may not be. And so having an audience and understanding your audience helps you to tailor your content, right? So who is your business plan for, right? Your audience is the management, right? So for example, if you want to attract your friend to come and work for you and start this business, they're going to be a part of the management. If they're going to be a part of the management, they want to know the direction of the business because that's going to influence their decisions, right? If you're going to be hiring people, they will become your employees. And your employees also need a compass to understand where they're headed, why they're doing what they're doing, and how you plan on getting there. Furthermore, many of your early customers will have to put up with problems, right? So I'll keep using my stream as an example, right? In this case, the management is just me, right? So I manage this right now. There's no one else joining me at this time. But in the future, there may be management involved, right? I don't have any employees. I'm my own employee. But knowing where I'm going is very important, right? My customers are you guys, right? You guys are my customers because you guys consume the content and you guys look at it, right? So I want you to know where we're headed in the long run. And the reason I want you to know where we're headed in the long run is because, right, the sound is not going to be perfect. The stream is not going to be perfect. The quality is not going to be perfect. Nothing is going to be perfect immediately, and nothing will approach that perfection, right? But it's not there. But knowing where our destination is, make sure that we're all working towards a common goal, and you understand that putting up with some issues and so on and so forth allows you to help achieve that goal in the future, right? And the goal of the stream in this case, or the goal of your business should be making it sustainable, right? Making it sustainable and hopefully solving some customer need, right? For us, the goal of solving our customer need is making access to education, to free education, right? That's of high quality, both free and ubiquitous, right? And ubiquitous means access to everyone that wants to learn. So anyone out there, whether or not they have access to college, whether or not they have access, as long as they have access to the internet, and perhaps one day even beyond that, they will have access to education, right? That's our goal. So furthermore, you want to think about your lenders, right? If somebody's going to be lending you money, right, and in this case no one is, for me, but you will likely have to borrow money if you're going to be starting a business because businesses are generally capital intensive, right? This has been a decreasing trend over time, but the reality is you still need money to do most things. And so your lenders are going to be interested in where you're headed, right? Furthermore, you have suppliers, right? Your suppliers. So your suppliers in this case will provide you raw materials and so on and so forth. And your suppliers will also experience some agony in working with you in the beginning, right? And they need to know why that agony is worth dealing with, right? So when they say, okay, well, let's say you're trying to buy beef, right? And you go out and you buy beef, and what you find is that, your orders of beef are very small and so on and so forth, and your supplier is reluctant to work with you. But you tell them, hey, my business plan is to start a worldwide chain, right? And so we'll keep working with you over time, and so you'll see our orders increase, right? And your suppliers may be more happy to deal with you. And then finally, and perhaps the lens that we'll be taking most often in this course is from the in this lecture, is from the perspective of investors, right? So if someone is going to invest in your company and own a part of it, right, they want to know where you're headed and how you're going to get there and what your plan is. But most importantly, they want to know how you're thinking about your business, right? Because everything, right, this is something just to nail down in business and finance, in just about everything, right? If you can predict the future, the best thing to do is play the lottery, right? And if you can't predict the future, the best thing to do is to admit that you can't, right? So there's going to be different planning levels, right? There's going to be different planning levels, and I'm going to cover this very briefly just because of the following reason, right? So there's going to be a mini plan, and there's going to be a comprehensive plan. So the more new, the more complex, the more difficult to explain, the more convoluted your idea, the more important it is to edge towards a comprehensive plan. It's important to think about these things as existing on a spectrum, right? So the most comprehensive plan is probably only necessary if you're building a company like SpaceX, right? Or a car manufacturer or something incredibly complex, then you need an incredibly comprehensive plan, right? If you're opening a pizza shop or dry cleaning or something like that, a mini plan is enough. How are you going to price? Where are you going to get money? When are you going to be operational? And what's your location? And why is it good, right? And so most ideas will fall somewhere in the middle, right? They'll fall somewhere in the middle, and that's what you should be aiming for. And your level of depth should, again, depend on your understanding of your audience. Your understanding of your audience. So these are going to be the two plans, and we're going to cover the most comprehensive version. We're going to cover the most comprehensive version because once you know the comprehensive version, you can start decreasing what you're doing, right? So you can start eliminating some facts based on what you're doing, right? So what's the general content of a business plan, right? So first you want to talk about the opportunity, right? This is in no particular order, right? More consider it a broad spectrum, and we'll talk about specific pages and parts of a business plan if you wish to write one on your own, or that ones you should look for if you're evaluating someone else's business plan, right? But specifically, right, you want to talk about the opportunity. So why is there an opportunity? Is it increasing technology? Is it a lower cost? Is it a faster way of doing something? Is it a cheaper product? Is it a better product? Are you solving some new need, right? You want to talk about resources, and this doesn't only refer to cash, right? Cash is going to be king, so if you have a bunch of cash in the bank account that you're willing to play with and you have a lot of time, that's a good thing to mention. If you don't, that's an important thing to mention as well. But you're also going to think about two more things. You're going to think about human resources, right? And what that means is the people that you're hiring, the people that you're working with, the people on the management team, right? These are your human resources. And you're going to talk about external resources, right? So external resources include things like unique insights into the problem and unique ways to take advantage of it. So for example, if you're selling customer relationship management software and you happen to know the top guys at one of the biggest sales companies in the world that make decisions and they're willing to invest in something like this, that's a resource, right? Next, you're going to talk about your team, and this is more your founding team and your management team, right? But in general, you want to be looking for your team to have a good range of expertise, right? If your team has a very limited range of expertise for solving the problem that you're trying to solve, you're going to have a lot of difficulty attracting capital, right? So if you're trying to build the next mobile app and you're outsourcing building the mobile app, that's a problem, right? You should have someone on your team that's going to do it because an investor can pay for their own outsourcing and build it themselves and achieve basically the same results, right? So your team has to complement your business, right? And if it doesn't at this point, you should be looking for a team, right? The next thing is your financing structure, right? And this is important to disclose because you want investors to understand where you're getting the money to build this business. So if you're borrowing at exorbitant rates to build this business, they need to know that because that's going to make your runway or the speed at which you use up cash much faster, right? So that's your financing structure. And finally, you're going to want to talk about context. And context includes things like the industry, regulations, and trends. Right? So for example, if it's predicted that more and more people will own cell phones, getting into the cell phone market is probably not a bad idea, right? If cell phones are going to be heavily regulated, probably not a great idea, right? However, if you can bypass this regulation or take advantage of it in some way or help another company take advantage of it, you can do that. And then finally, you want to talk about the industry, right? So how competitive is your industry? The thing is, if you're starting a startup to compete with Google, you're probably not going to succeed, right? And the reason is Google's just too big and has too many resources, right? I'm not saying that you shouldn't. You probably should because that's a good idea. But be prepared for a higher than average failure rate in that plan, right? So let's talk about the actual structure. What is the actual structure of a business plan, right? So before I begin this, I'm just going to take a look at the chat, see if there are any questions. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them as we go along. But I think a lot of this stuff is relatively self-explanatory, and I try to go into as much depth as I can without being repetitive, right? So the first thing you're going to have is a cover page, right? And this is pretty basic. It's going to have your name, hopefully your business name, your logo, your address, right? It's going to address your audience, right? So if you're preparing this for investors, address the investors. If you're preparing this for a certain capital firm, address the capital firm. Whoever it is that you're addressing, right? And then it's going to have any kind of disclaimers, right? If you have some kind of legal issues or you need to tell them something, you're going to put the disclaimers right on the cover page, right? Because if you want them to sign something like an NDA or a non-disclosure agreement, you want them to sign it and know about it on the first page rather than the last page, right? Because by the time they've gotten to the last page, they already know everything and could choose not to sign it, right? So as a general rule, speaking of NDA disclosure, you're not going to want to use one. There's similar contracts available at Y Combinator, which are basically like more friendly agreements, right? So they don't have all the crazy legal language and so on and so forth. They're basically like, hey, we're working on this company. We'd really appreciate it if you didn't go tell other people. We can't really sue you because we don't have the resources, but the reality is we'd like you to keep it private. And, I think that's enough just as a general information, right? So the next thing you're going to work on is your table of contents. Right? Next thing you're going to work on is your table of contents. So your table of contents has to make it easier to navigate, right? Nobody is going to sit there and read the entire table of contents, right? The time they're going to use the entire table of contents or any of the table of contents is either when they first picked up the report or when they've picked it up a second time. So if they picked it up a second time and they're looking for a specific piece of information, you want to have that piece of information listed, right? You're going to think about what that piece of information might be, but you're going to have that listed, right? If it's the first time they're picking it up, they're going to want to be able to skim it, right? So you might want to title certain sections in bold so that they're able to say, okay, so this is the structure and this is what I'll be going for. I kind of understand the first three things. Maybe I'll just skip to the financials, right? So your goal is to make it easier for your audience to navigate what you're giving them. The next thing is going to be your executive summary. Now, an executive summary is actually very important. And the reason the executive summary is so important is because that is your hook, right? Somebody that opens your business plan is going to read the executive summary. If they're interested, they'll keep reading. If they're not interested, they won't, right? And for that reason, you follow a couple of rules that are not set in stone, but that are quite strong recommendations, right? These are pretty strong recommendations. So the first thing is you don't want to exceed 1 page, right? That's not a summary. If you have a 5-page summary, that's too long, right? Nobody's going to read that. Right? If you can get it to a paragraph, get it to a paragraph. But usually you'll need about 1 page, right? And what you want to cover is you want to cover the opportunity. You want to cover the concept. You want to cover the industry. The target market. Your advantages. The economics of your business, and we'll cover each of these in more detail. The economics of your business, your team, your request, and that's it, right? So you're going to keep it to 1 page, and first you're going to talk about your opportunity, right? There's a huge opportunity in customer relationship management software. There's a huge opportunity in bringing education to Twitch, right? So because we're doing this and because it's something I'm pretty intimately familiar and something I'm thinking about quite often, let's talk about that rather than another scenario, right? So the opportunity is that live interaction brings an extra dynamic to education that is not available in video, right? Okay, perfect. What's the concept? We're going to stream lectures and we're going to stream the news and different business programs on Twitch and pilot what this works, right? What's the industry? The industry is live streaming and education, right? Education is pretty crowded, live streaming is pretty crowded, but the intersection is not, right? Who is your target market? People who don't have access to education, people who can't afford access to education, people who would like to enhance their education, right? What are my advantages? My advantages is that my product is free. My advantage is that the source of my funding is separate from the source of my audience. And my advantage is that I have experience as a lecturer at a university and quite a depth of knowledge and experience in business. The economics of my business are the following. I have people that watch and people that support people watching, right? And the people that support people watching are usually separate from my audience. And what this means is that there are a lot of people who believe in a better future for education, but don't have the time to contribute to it happening, right? To actually take action. What I'm doing on their behalf is taking action, and what I ask for a return is the financial support needed to expand my business, to expand my opportunity, to bring more lectures, to bring more classes, to bring more subjects, and to bring more depth to what I offer, right? And then finally, my request is that people donate to the nonprofit in order to support that, right? So if I was presenting this to an investor, this is how I would present it, right? And that would be one page, very fast, very broad strokes, right? Don't get into what Twitch is, don't get into super serious concepts, very broad strokes on your executive summary, okay? The next thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to write in either synopsis or narrative form about your business. So I've done both, right? In synopsis form, you can say the following. Lecturing on Twitch in order to provide people with access to education for free that they may not have access to on a usual basis, and the live chat interaction that comes with it to provide another opportunity for learning and leveraging the professor as a resource rather than just a lecture. Okay? That's my synopsis. The narrative form would be for a different business I started, right? And the narrative form would be something like this. So the business I started in the past was, or had to do with the following, right? So real estate agents show apartments, right? And a lot of those apartments are locked. And they're locked on keys, and you have to go somewhere else to get the keys, or you have to wait for the agent, right? Our business decided to put smart locks on the doors. But the way we told our story wasn't through the eyes of a synopsis. We're going to put smart locks on doors, because that's not that exciting, right? The synopsis was the narrative, was the following. On Monday, I called a rental that was available in my area. And I was told by the agent that I could come by on Thursday at 12 o'clock. And that was the only time I could come by because that's when he was available, right? And that's horrible, because between Monday and Thursday there are 4 days. I may find something else, right? They're losing valuable income, right? And at 12 o'clock I may not be available, so I may not see this place until the weekend or whenever we can make our schedules align, right? And that smart lock allows us to change that, right? It allows us to schedule more flexibly. And so that's the narrative that was told, was my own experience and why we had started the business, right? Another thing that we did for the narrative is we said, okay, so have you ever heard of anyone being excited to go through the real estate process? And the truth was, no. No one's ever said that. And we wanted to make that happen, right? So that allows you to just put a little bit, think of it like in advertising, right? If you had to advertise your business, right, just in a few words, in a few sentences, whatever it is, if you had to advertise your business idea and really sell someone on it, like what is going to pull them in emotionally, strategically, what is going to pull them in, right? And this, once again, will depend on your audience and it will depend on your business. And so there's no clear solution to what is happening, right? You're going to have to be flexible. The next thing you want to cover, and so from here on out, right, this is basically what we're doing, right? So the summary and the synopsis are like two little pieces on top, right? They're basically drawing the person in, right? And then the rest of it is going to be this large pyramid where we're going to go from kind of more broad structures to more specific ones, right? You can think of it as an iceberg, right? So basically, you're selling someone on the tip of the iceberg, right? So if this is the water level, this is the tip of the iceberg. You're selling someone on this, and you're expecting them to go down and read the following so that they actually understand what's going on, and then eventually invest in your business. I don't know how to relate that to icebergs, but let's just say that you want them to throw money at the iceberg, okay? So you want them to throw money at the iceberg, and so what you do is you do this following, right? You do the following. First, you talk about the industry, your target customer, and your competitors. Right? So here, in terms of your industry, and the level of depth is always going to depend, one, on your audience, and two, on your actual industry. So if your industry is opening pizza shops, that's pretty basic and understandable, and people basically understand what's going on there. If your industry is quantum computing, you're going to have to spend a little bit more time on what's going on there. But the thing is, you want to be an expert, right? So we're going to talk about potential pitfalls with investors, but you want to be an expert. Because if you bring this to an investor and the investor knows more about the industry than you do, you're in trouble. Because then why would they trust you with any amount of money to open this business, right? The next is you're going to want to talk about your target customer. So this is your niche, your demographics, right? Is your demographic growing or shrinking, right? So we talked about earlier, if you're opening an amusement park for the elderly, that could be a great idea. That could be a great idea. But with the number of elderly people declining, you may have missed a ball, right? So you want to talk about your demographic, and you want to talk about who they are, you want to talk about how they consume things and what they do. And then you want to talk about your competitors within the industry and your competitors in general in terms of providing a solution, right? So for example, in the smart lock industry, there's no competitors for putting smart locks on vacant apartments. But there are real estate agents, and those are competitors. There are in-unit management offices, and those are competitors, right? So within education on Twitch, there are very few competitors, right? However, all of us are competing for the same audience, right? Which is individuals that want to watch something on the web, right? And so you want to get as broad and as specific as is necessary, right? So how are you carving out your niche? How are you getting from this broad group of people, individuals that want to learn, for example, right, to individuals that learn on my business channel, right? So that's what you want to talk about in those sections, right? And you'll do a lot of research in order to get to that, right? But the reality is, don't spend too much time, right? Become an expert, but don't spend too much time. You're not expected to write a thesis on this. You're just expected to be able to answer questions and defend your position, right? The next section you're going to write about is you're going to write about company description, right? So you've already addressed your industry, right? So let's put a big triangle here so that we kind of follow what we're doing, right? You've already addressed your industry. The next thing you want to describe is your company, right? Now, importantly, the very best segment to that, the very best transition, is to say how your company fits within the industry, right? So if your company has a history, you want to talk about that. What have you done in the past? How long have you existed? So on and so forth, right? You want to talk about your objectives. If your location is important, if you're opening physical, brick and mortar retail, that's important. If you have an internet company and you have available gigabit internet, that's important, right? So your location, if it's related, right? If you're running a little thing out of your house and you're just located in New York, that's enough information, right? So next you'll talk about the scope of your business, right? So how far are you willing to go? How big is it going to be? What are your plans for scope, right? And here you generally want to err on the side of ambition, right? And the idea is that you can always fail to get all the way there, but if you get 90% of the way there, that's very good, right? So you don't want to be overly ambitious. You don't want to be coming out there and saying, well, we're starting the next Facebook, guaranteed. I know this because I wrote it down on this piece of paper, right? That's nonsense. You have to be able to defend your scope, right? So if there really is a need, so for example, right, the scope for this stream and the scope for these classes is I would like to have them available worldwide. I would like to have them consumed worldwide, and I would like to provide people with an opportunity to learn worldwide, right? And importantly, for free, right? So if this is the scope of my business, that's great, right? That's very, very good. And this is a positive scope, right? Now, I have to be able to defend and then put into actionable terms how I'm going to get there, right? So how I'm going to get there is by hiring other instructors, is by providing them with the means to be able to lecture on a regular basis, by structuring curriculums, by adding depth with homeworks, quizzes, and tests, right? And all of these things, and by making it available for free continuously and online to anyone that has a connection to the internet, right? So my eventual scope may actually have me investing in better access to internet, right? So, it may be a considerable cost. However, right, if a remote village somewhere out in Russia or India or China or wherever doesn't have access to internet, it may be worth investing in that, right? And that's something that Google defines as its scope, right? Because it tries to bring everybody on the web because it wants to have all of the users using its search, right? So that fits into scope. The next piece is legal issues. If you have legal issues, if you have any kind of issues in your business, please, please, please be honest with your investors. Lying to your investors is the worst way to start a relationship, right? Think about it that, if you tell your future wife that you're texting right now and that has never seen you, that you are a handsome, ripped movie star, and she shows up and you're actually pretty handsome, just not that ripped and definitely not a movie star, you're going to run into issues in that relationship. And investors, you can consider the same way. It's your relationship with the investor, right? So start on an honest basis and work from there. So you're going to want to disclose any kind of issues that you're having with legal troubles or anything else. Next, you're going to want to talk about ownership. Who owns your company and how much, right? If you've given away 95% of your company to your uncle and your uncle gets to decide what happens, there's probably nothing for you to talk about with a business plan because your uncle could just change his mind, right? If you want to retain complete control, there's probably nothing for you to talk about with investors because they're going to want a piece of your company. So you're going to want to talk about ownership and where you plan to go with ownership, right? So where you plan to head. The next thing you want to talk about is achievements. Anything that you've already done, right? Anything that you've already done. And this can be very small things. If you've reached out to 100 customers and gotten their feedback on your product, if your product is in manufacturing, if you've created it, if you've served 10,000 people, if you've hit a massive milestone, whatever your achievement is, you're going to want to put it in here because you're going to want to highlight it later in more detail, but putting it in there is very good, right? Next, you're going to want to cover your competence. And this is what we talked about before with having a well-structured team. Right? If your plan is to build the next Google and you're 4 lawyers, that's not going to be a great team to build the next Google, right? If your plan is to build the next law firm and you're 4 software engineers, also not a great idea, right? So you're going to talk about your competence in creating this business, right? You're going to want to cover the nature of your activity. Right? And the nature of your activity is basically just how you go about doing business. So if you develop software and sell it, that's the nature of your activity. If you import raw materials and manufacture, that's the nature of your activity. If you design new innovative products and have them manufactured by someone else, that's the nature of your business, right? The nature of your activity is going to be important just as a basic understanding of what's going on, right? Then you're going to want to talk about industry economics. Where does the money come from? Where does the money in your industry come from on a regular basis, right? So who are your customers and why are they willing to pay for what you're doing? How are people currently being charged? How are you changing that? How are you taking advantage of it? How are you pricing differently? Anything that includes your industry economics, right? And more importantly, perhaps, is the growth of your industry or the trends in your industry. Is your industry growing? Are more people using it? Is it ripe for consumers? Whatever it is that you believe is important about your industry is going to get there, right? The next and final thing, right, is your intentions for exit. And this is something we're going to spend a minute on because there's a lot of different ways that you can exit a startup, right? Perhaps the most glamorous way is to IPO, right? To give an initial public offering and basically open up your company to outside investors in the general market and have this huge payday worth billions of dollars for all of your investors and everybody's happy, and you're termed like the king of the day and you get to ring the bell on the NASDAQ exchange and so on and so forth, right? Those are your intentions of exit. If that's your intention of exit, you better have a very good plan for getting to that IPO stage and some experience or someone on your team with experience of getting to an IPO because that's not easy. If your intention is to sell your business to someone like Google or a large law firm or a media conglomerate, if your intention is to sell, you need to know who you're selling to and you need to know better than your investor because your investor isn't going to go around selling your company. You are, right? And if you don't know who you're going to contact yet, figure it out. Figure out how you're going to exit because your investor is going to want to get paid. They're going to want to get paid at some point. They're going to want their money back and they're going to want to hopefully earn some money, right? But they're going to want to know that you have a way to do that because if you have no way to do that and no intention of doing that in the future, they're just investing in what is essentially a black hole, right? So that's your company description, right? And you're going to spend a little bit of time on this. Don't overdo it because you're going to elaborate on each of those sections in the future, right? So what you're going to elaborate on first is product and service plan. Now this is the most important part of your business, hands down. Hands down. Your expertise, everything else falls second place to this. This is the most important part of your business. And the reason it's the most important part of your business is because you need to tell your investors what you're offering. What are you offering your customers? Are you offering them a faster solution, a better solution? a cheaper solution, a more innovative solution, a more beautiful solution, right? Whatever it is, what are you offering and how are you doing it? Are you building a product? Are you making a service? Are you selling your service? Are you renting your service? Are you renting your product, right? How are you offering it, right? Next, you're going to talk about your advantage. So let's be honest. If your goal is to break into the consumer product goods market and you want to compete with Lego, right? It's going to be hard to find an advantage, right? You're probably going to want to hit them on price. Legos tend to be pretty expensive, right? So you're probably going to want to hit them on price. But the thing is, Lego has many advantages, right? One, they could compete on price with you. And two, they have their own manufacturing, right? Which you probably don't. So you're going to have to find a contractor that's willing to do it. So you need to figure out what your advantage is, right? Perhaps you've been in toy distribution to public schools for the last 30 years, right? And public schools always avoid buying Lego because it's too expensive. And that's who you're going to target. You're going to target public schools. You're going to exploit those connections and try to grow that business, right? That's the next thing. So you want to talk about your advantages. Besides your advantages, you want to provide a model or a prototype. This has two things. One, you've thought about far enough about how you're going to make something and how it looks, right? So you're not going to be spending your valuable money that you've just gotten from the investor on figuring out your prototype. Now, this isn't always possible, so sometimes you just build a model, right? You build a model, whatever it is, the more physical, the more interactive it is, the better off you are. Because the best way for people to understand something is to be able to play with it and use it and mush it around and click on it and see what it does. It can be limited. It can be limited, right? It doesn't have to be the perfect thing. It's not going to be, hopefully, because then you're seeking funding too late, right? But it has to be something physical that they can look at. Because what you imagine in your head when you're saying something and writing something down is completely different from what it's going to look like in their heads, right? And in order to connect the two, you're going to have to create some kind of model or some kind of prototype. Even if it's a web page that barely works and just has the big pictures for where you're going, or a user experience, whatever it is, that's what you're going to do, right? The next thing you're going to want to talk about is your innovations. Your innovations, right? So what are you changing? Have you figured out some manufacturing processes that's cheaper, or are you competing with a larger behemoth on price, right? So for example, if you want to enter the ketchup market, and you're going to be producing ketchup, and your selling goal is that you're going to sell it at $1 cheaper than Heinz. Guess what? If you sell it at $1 cheaper than Heinz, you might make maybe 2-3 cents of profit, right? But Heinz can sell it at $2 cheaper than Heinz and put you out of business almost instantly, right? Because Heinz can. They have the margins to be able to do that. So you want to talk about your innovations, and you want real innovations, right? You want real innovations. It doesn't mean that you have something patented, although if you do, that's very good, right? It doesn't mean you have something trademarked, although if you do, that's very good, right? But you want to talk about what you're innovating in terms of the business, in terms of what you're offering customers. Where is the innovation coming from, right? How are you doing things better or differently, right? And the next thing you want to talk about, talking about patents, is patents and legal protection. Now, if you actually have a patented invention, that's a lot more valuable to an investor. Why? Because now you own that mode of business, right? So for example, if you have a patent on a specific smart lock, if you have a patent on a specific way of marketing something, a specific process, whatever it is, you can defend your patent. And if you can defend your patent, you can stifle competition in your space for long enough to grow and bloom. If you don't have a patent, don't fret. It's not the end of the world. However, having a patent is very good, because at the end of the day, even if your business does not succeed, you are still in possession of some value that you can later sell, right? So you can later sell your patent. The next thing you want to cover is your growth strategy. How do you plan on growing? Right? The thing you don't want to say here is, I'm going to grow by word of mouth, right? What that means is, I'm going to let my customers do the job for me, right? That's great and all, and if that happens, that's fantastic and good for you, but no investor is going to rely on you being able to predict how your consumers will act, right? So they need to know, how are you getting to them? Why are they going to talk about your product? How are you encouraging that behavior, right? So the growth strategy for PayPal, for example, was to give any new user $10, right? This is an expensive growth strategy, but as they proved, it was the most effective in their business, right? So That's what you want to talk about with growth strategies. How are you going to grow your business, and how are you going to do something positive with that? And then finally, you want to cover secondary markets. Now, this is a hit and miss situation, right? And the reason it's a hit and miss situation is for the following reasons. If your secondary markets are like way far flung, right? So if you're opening a pizza shop and your secondary market is the distribution of computers, that's a problem, right? Because then you're just saying that I'm going to use your money to build a totally different business, right? If you're opening a, if your secondary market, so for example, right? I'm doing these lectures, right? My secondary market is somebody being able to remix my lectures, right? Somebody being able to put pieces together. Another secondary market is live lectures, right? So I could do a live lecture in front of a larger audience live and put it on the web at the same time, right? That's another secondary market, right? Something else I can do is I can produce free-to-use textbooks, right? That's a secondary market, right? And something I plan to get into eventually, right? So these are all secondary markets that are related and important, but are importantly not the crux of my business, right? So if you're actually attacking a secondary market, right? If your plan is to do one thing to then do another and that other thing makes money, put that other thing first. Put that other thing first and describe your plan for getting there that way, right? Otherwise, you're going to make your investors very upset because they're going to understand that you have to build one business that succeeds, right? Let's say that's 10% odds, and that's being generous. And then you have to build a second business that succeeds. So instead of 10% odds, you have 1% odds of getting there. Right, so be very careful with what you talk about and the scope that you talk about with secondary markets, right? I made this mistake at Harvard Business School when I was presenting my company, is that I got too carried away with future potentials because I tend to be a bit of a dreamer, right? But it's a mistake I learned the hard way, and one that you don't have to because you know that, right? The next step explores your growth, right? So what is your marketing plan? Now, an important thing about marketing plans. If you don't currently have a marketing person, or any marketing expertise, or any marketing experience, keep your plan simple, right? So if you're building some website and your plan is to be, the #1 search result on Google and to buy advertising with AdWords and spread it out on all the forums in the world, your investors are going to want you to have expertise in doing that. If you have no expertise in doing it, don't say you're going to do it. If you do say you're going to do it, tell them how you're going to get the expertise now. Not tomorrow when you have the money and can hire someone for $100,000 a year. Because the last thing your investor wants is someone that's not invested in the company that has a huge amount of leverage over its success, right? Because if you hire a marketing executive and they charge you $100,000 a year, and they see that they're contributing a lot to your business, and then they charge you another $100,000 a year because they can, you're going to be forced to pay through the nose for that marketing executive, right? So you're going to be stuck in a difficult position. So remember, with your marketing plan, keep it realistic and keep it within your abilities, right? So the first thing you're going to talk about is strategy. How are you reaching your customers, right? How are you doing that? How are you identifying your customers? Identifying, right? How are you identifying your customers? If I wanted to build a theme park for senior citizens, how do I identify my customers? How do I decide that these senior citizens are people that go to theme parks and the other ones aren't, right? Is it a mailing? Is it a response to a survey? Do people in nursing homes, are people in nursing homes more likely to go? Perhaps I'm targeting nursing homes because they bus people around, right? And they go to these theme parks. I don't know. It all depends on customer identification, right? The next thing is pricing strategy. Who and how much are you charging, right? If you're charging the nursing home bulk rates to bring you hundreds of senior citizens, that's a pretty good idea. If you're charging individual senior citizens thousands of dollars to go to your amusement park, that's a terrible idea, right? So what is your pricing strategy? How are you charging customers? Is it on a subscription basis? Is it on a one-time fee basis? Are you charging them on a loan basis? So do they pay off the product and you own it for as long as they don't pay it off, right? How does it work and how do you make money? Perhaps it's a combination of multiple of those. Maybe there's an entry fee and then you're charging people down the line, right? Maybe you plan on actually charging a different customer for advertising and not charging your audience and your specific use, right? So that really depends. The next thing is your selling approach. Are you going door to door with your product? Is this like a Hoover vacuum cleaner that you need to sell door to door? Are you selling it on the web? Are you able to ship it, right? what is your selling approach? Do you have to have a massive sales team? Because the thing is, these things scale very differently, right? So if you need to go door to door to sell Hoover vacuum cleaners, you're going to need to hire a lot of people to go door to door in order to blanket America. So if your goal is to be the #1 vacuum cleaner in America, and then you have to go to door to do so, that's going to be a very difficult thing to do, right? So that relates to your next thing, which is your sales force, right? Who is your sales force? Is it online marketers that are very good at attracting attention over social media? Is it individual salespeople that walk around? Is it product experts that can offer advice and sell your services as a byproduct, right? Are you leveraging some outside sales force? For example, are you inventing a product that, for example, insurance companies, right, or insurance agents can tack on, earn extra commission on, right, and sell to their customers for you? So are you able to leverage some kind of outside sales force? Right? And how do you plan on doing that? The next thing is your distribution. Distribution relates to how you get your product to the people that want it most, right? Or that need it, or that have a use for this product. And the way you decide distribution, the way you think about distribution, is how is this product physically getting to people? Is it downloadable software? If so, where are your servers and how many will you need and how much will that cost? Can you ship the product over Amazon? If so, how difficult will it be to get established and what are your margins? Do you have to sell it to supermarkets? Okay, in that case, what supermarkets target the same demographics, right? So you want to think about distribution. Or again, if it's door to door, maybe you drive around with all the Hoover vacuum cleaners in your trunk, right? How do you get it there? Do you get it to them over an app and then connect to service lenders, right? Similar to how house cleaning happens, right? More on the web now. So what is your distribution strategy, okay? The next thing is, what promotions are you doing, right? So if you tell your investors that you have a certain pricing strategy, for example, you're going to charge, $100 for admissions to your amusement park, right? And then you turn around and then you say, well, we're actually running a promotion and it's going to be $20, right? The math is going to be very different on those things, right? So you have to be clear about your promotions and why they work, right? You have to be clear about why they work. So for example, if you're putting your promotional $80 off, right, for the amusement park at senior care centers, that's probably a good idea, right? If you're putting them at pizza shops, that's probably not a great idea, right? So that's the next thing. After that, you want to talk about any credit and pricing policies. Pricing, right? So, for example, a lot of subscription software will have, or especially a lot of web clients will have tiers for pricing. So, for example, if you're an individual or a small company of under 10 people, you're able to use it for free. If you're over 100 people, you get more services and you're able to do it differently, right? Some things extend credit. So, for example, if you're selling cars, a lot of people don't have $48,000, $50,000 in their pocket to spend on a car, so you'll need to extend credit. How are you going to do that, and how long is it going to be for, right? Most consumer product goods companies will say, we'll give you a 2% discount if you pay on time, right? If you pay in the first 30 days, but you have up to 90 days to pay for the product, right? So what are your credit and pricing policies? And then finally, you're going to want to walk through and here. So you're going to want to cover warranties. You're going to want to cover warranties or any kind of guarantees that you offer and how you plan on meeting them and what potential hits they could take, right? So the important thing is you're not just describing each of these things. You're also describing how they could fail, right? How you could have problems with them, right? How they could not work, right? Because that's important for an investor to understand, and it shows them that you've been thorough in your research and you understand what you're doing. Now, the last piece of the marketing plan that we want to cover here is your sales forecasts. Okay, so here's the reality, okay? You're going to be tempted to make this look better than it is. You're just going to be, that's just the case, right? So if you currently run one store and you're going for investment to open 10 more stores, right? You're going to want to look at, you're going to be tempted to look at the very best month, right? Say it was over here. And then you're going to say, okay, well, if I open 50 more stores, that's just this times 50, right? It'll take me that long to open the store, so that's how much money I expect to make, right? Investors know that's bullshit. You know that's bullshit, right? So as long as you know that's bullshit, investors will figure it out, right? And if they don't figure it out and you fool them, you'll ruin some relationships down the line, and that's just not worth it, right? So keep your sales forecasts conservative and realistic. If you haven't made any sales yet, if you're just developing the product and you're entering the market, right? Try to have some demographic information. Try to have reached out and tried your marketing channels and see how many people it brings in and how many people you're able to close, right? And base your sales forecast on those numbers, but don't overdo it. don't overdo it, right? It's not realistic. It's not going to work. An investor is just going to think that you're trying to scam them out of some money, right? Because they're the ones bearing the risk. And if they're the ones bearing the risk, you've got some problems there. All right. So, after the marketing plan, you're going to want to talk about operations and development. So at this point, right, we've already covered what your business does and what it offers, and we've already covered how it's going to get to your customers, right? Now it's important to understand that once it gets to your customers, or in order to get to your customers, you have to be able to produce it. And you have to be able to produce it, two things. You have to be able to produce it consistently, and you have to be able to produce it cheaply, or cheaper than how much you sell it for, right? So at a profit, right? So how are you providing your product or service? How is it provided, right? Whether it's a product or a service, how is it provided? Are you renting it? Are you selling it? Do people come pick it up at your store? Do you ship it to them? Do you drive it over to them? How does that work, right? How are you creating value? How are you creating value in your operations? So, for example, if you want to compete with Heinz Ketchup, right, in a specific area, let's say you want to beat Heinz Ketchup in California, right? Maybe you're adding value by growing organic tomatoes yourself, right? You're growing the organic tomatoes, and therefore your input is very, very low. You're able to sell the tomatoes at cost, and you're able to bring them in. So you have to think about how you're creating value, right? You have to think about all of your facilities. Does it need an office? Does it need a storefront? Do you need manufacturing, right? Do you need plastics manufacturing? Do you need to be able to build labelers, and so on and so forth, right? And that fits into equipment as well. Right? So you're going to have to think about the hard assets that you're going to need in order to produce it, right? And with those hard assets, you're going to have to make the decision and justify it, right? You're going to have to make the decision and justify it if you're doing it in-house or if you're outsourcing, right? Are you hiring someone else to do it, or are you doing it in-house? So the reality is, if your process is adding value, you don't want to outsource it. Right? So if you're building software and that's your entire business, if you outsource building the software, they're just going to duplicate it, someone else is going to duplicate it, and you've lost it, right? You have to deal with this third party all the time and so on and so forth, so it's not going to work, right? So a lot of those times you have to in-house it. However, if some component of what you're doing, right, is already mass-produced, like Bluetooth receivers, for example, you can outsource that, right? Where are you buying it? How much does it cost? And is it available on Alibaba? How long does it take to ship, right? You're going to want to show the investor that you've thought about all of these things before you're giving your presentation, right? Finally, you're going to want to talk to them about three things, right? You're going to talk to them about quality assurance. How are you making sure that the quality of your products is good, right? How are you controlling inventory? How are you making sure that you're not overproducing or you're not underproducing, and that you have enough to service the needs of your clients? And then finally, who are you subcontracting? Right? Are you subcontracting some people for design, for prototype testing, for 3D printing? For whatever it is, are you subcontracting those people, and what is it that they can do for you, and how is it that they're getting it done? Right? So that's the next step. Okay, so that's operations and development. This is a pretty long unit, but business plans are a thorough concept, and they're worth covering in a lot of detail because likely you'll end up using them. Next, the management team. Importantly here, include what's relevant, right? Include what's relevant. If you grew up in a poor country and you have a lot of difficulties in life and you overcame a lot of obstacles, if that's not relevant to your business, don't include it, right? If that's not relevant to your character, don't include it. If you can find a way to relate it, maybe include it, right? If that's made you especially frugal or especially whatever it is, you can include that. But try to keep it more or less professional, right? In general, investors will prefer a great team. Will prefer team over product. And here's the reason. If this team is really good, if the product that they're building doesn't work, this team can build another product. If the product is really good and this team sucks, they can fail to make the product, or even if they succeed, they'll be unable to produce anything else, right? So your team is going to be more valuable to you than the actual product. So spend some time thinking about how you're going to possess your team, right? The next thing you want to realize is that ideas don't equal success. Don't equal success, right? I know that a lot of people feel very strongly about their ideas in business and what they're going to do, right? And I regularly just talk about all of mine because I don't think there's any reason to hide them from people. But a lot of people feel very strongly about their ideas and how they can have an impact on the world, and they keep them very secretive and so on and so forth. Ideas are worthless. Implementation is what counts. Being able to execute on those ideas is what counts. So if you're unable to execute on those ideas, it's not going to matter. And here you're demonstrating that you're going to be able to execute, right? Some of the things you want to talk about is your expertise. If you're building a software company and you're a software engineer, great, that's fantastic. What's your expertise in? Why are you specifically fit for this, and why is the rest of your team fit for this, right? Your past experience. Unless it's related, they don't care that you worked in a fast food chain when you were 17 years old, right? It doesn't mean that if you can't relate it, you should put it in, or you shouldn't put it in ever, but the fact of the matter is, your past experience should relate and reinforce your expertise, right? That's very important. And then finally, your indication of networks. Indication of networks. And this is pretty important, right? So like I said before, if you were starting a Lego manufacturing company to compete with Lego, and you were going to make, I don't know, let's call them building blocks, right? So you were going to make a product called building blocks, but your network is in people that decide what toys are available for kindergarten children or for 1st through 6th grade at recess or whatever it is, and that network is very strong for you. That's an advantage you want to talk about because you have implicitly a way to distribute your product. If you're building the next Google Calendar, that's going to be way better than Google Calendar, but your plan isn't to IPO, your plan is to sell it to Google or one of its competitors, right? Then knowing someone at Google that's responsible for acquiring companies is going to be very valuable, right? So if you have a strong network in what you're doing, emphasize it. If you don't have a strong network in what you're doing, emphasize how you're going to get there and why you're the team that can get there, right? That's very important. The next thing you're going to want to talk about is the thing that's most avoided in business plans. There's this overarching assumption that everything that we do has to be positive and rosy and wonderful. This is not the case, right? There are risks in your business. If there were no risks in your business, there would be no reward. So if you're claiming that you're going to be making $0 and probably losing money, then there's probably no risk, right? But if you're going to be making money, there's some risk, and you're going to want to address the risk, right? So these are potential pitfalls. Where can your business fail, right? Where can your business hit any kind of problems, right? And if you have strategies for overcoming these, talk about them, right? So product market fit. So basically, if you go out and make something and the market doesn't like it, that's it, you're done, right? So famously, a bunch of telecommunications companies got together, right, and they built this network of satellites, right? They built this network of satellites. They launched these satellites into space, right? This is our planet. This is, countries here, different kinds of countries and stuff, right? So this is our planet, right? They built this network of satellites to support a cellular network, right? To support a cellular network in order for people to talk on the phone. And it took them 7 years to do this. So they got a plan. They spent like $15 billion, right? It was some ridiculous amount of money, right? This is right around the beginning of cell phones. And basically they released this cell phone that you had to carry a suitcase around in order to communicate on, right? And it was a disaster. It completely failed. Because people didn't want to carry on a suitcase and talk about it on the phone. They just didn't. It was too much work. It was unnecessary. It was way too expensive. There was no way for them to do it, right? And the fact of the matter is they invested a lot of time into doing this, right? Because they didn't first identify product market fit. So if they had planned out their business and thought about, okay, well, what does this look like as a finished product? Well, it's going to be a suitcase and we're going to carry it around. If they went to their customers and says, are you willing to carry around a suitcase to be able to talk on the phone outside? And their customers said, well, hell no. And then, are you willing to pay thousands of dollars for that privilege? And their customers said, hell no. They wouldn't have launched all those satellites and wasted all that time and money, right? So lack of market acceptance or product market fit is very important, right? The next thing you want to think about is competitor retaliation. If you're starting a company that competes with anyone, retaliation. you're going to have to expect retaliation, right? And the harder you step on someone's toes, the stronger the retaliation. So anticipate what's going to happen, anticipate what can happen, and identify who and what competitors can do to step on you, right? This is as important for you as it is for your investors, right? So if you're providing something and it's as easy as the company hitting an on switch and doing it on their own, right, an established player doing it on their own. So for example, if you were going to bottle ketchup and mayonnaise together, right, and make a ketchup mayo mix, and for Heinz, it would take something like, a couple of weeks of planning to release a product that's of superior quality and much cheaper, you're going to get hit with competitor retaliation. If you have no way to defend yourself, you're going to fail, right? So that's an important thing to look at, right? The next thing is longer time, more money. Longer time or more money, right? There's a famous phrase that whatever you plan, right, is going to take twice as long and cost twice as much. This is true. Have a plan, right? If it does take twice as long, if it does cost twice as much, where are you going to get money? How much money are you going to need? At what points do you expect that it could be delayed, right? What points are least predictable in your business? So the next thing you want to talk about, in critical risk, right, is inadequate financing. So what happens if you don't get enough money at a critical stage? Right? So let's say your first round of funding is to develop the product. Your second round of funding is to reach your customers. Your third round of product is to open a factory, right? What happens if you're unable to open the factory? What are your contingency plans, right? And you're going to want to flesh these out. You're going to want to flesh these out as much as possible. You don't want them to just be on the surface. You don't want to just say, oh, well, we thought about it and we think some of our competitors might retaliate, right? In particular, we think Google might have a similar company and they might mess with us, right? No. You want to flesh these out as much as possible because this is actually what gives your investor confidence, not your fancy sales graph or your fancy, the industry is worth billions of dollars and we only need 0.01% to be profitable. No. This is where the investor gets confidence because the investor understands that they're taking a risk. They wouldn't be getting paid down the line if they weren't taking a risk. They understand that, and they probably understand that most or better than most people, right? Especially if they've been an investor for a long time. So they want to know the nature of their risk because the entire time you're talking about this, they're evaluating two things, right? Or the entire time they're reading it, they're evaluating two things. How fit is the team to deal with these risks, right? So if your risk is the ability to raise more money and you have a very limited network to raise money from, that's a problem, right? And then they're also thinking, okay, as an investor, how can I help them deal with these risks, right? Maybe they have a very strong network for building factories, right? Maybe they have a very strong network for other things, and that's something that you often see considered on Shark Tank, right? How can I help with my connections to boost this business and get it over these humps, right? So the more disclosure you have here, the more it is to your benefit. So really try to think and spend a lot of time on that piece, right? Because everything else before it has basically led up to that, right? Once you're done with critical risk, you want to talk about offerings. Offerings, right? And this is basically just how much money you need and how much money you're going to spend and what you're going to spend it on, right? So are you willing? So basically, you typically want to raise anywhere from 12 to 18 months of operations, right? So you don't want to be fundraising every day. You want to be fundraising as a focused task, right? So 12 to 18 months of operation is usually enough, right? It's usually enough before your next round of financing, right? You're going to provide your runway. And your runway is the following. If your business has $100 and you're spending $1 a day to keep it alive, you have 100 days. If your business has $1,000 and you're spending $100 a day, you have 10 days, right? So that ratio is very, very, very important because it's going to tell your investors how long you're going to last on that money, right? Finally, you're going to want to provide something detailed, right? Something detailed like where your money is coming from and how you're going to spend it. So whether or not you're going to invest it into factories, into production, into software development, into salaries, you're going to want to indicate that you've shopped around for these things, that you've gotten the best price, and importantly, right, that you're doing things that are ethical, right? So, for example, if you're raising $500,000 to pay yourself a $200,000 salary, there better be a very, 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 very good reason for paying that big a salary. And usually investors won't approve it, right? Because investors aren't in the business of funding your lifestyle. They're in the business of investing into businesses, right? So you're going to want to provide detailed assumptions and quotes, right? This is very important. assumptions and quotes. And you're going to want to do this throughout. The more concrete, the better, right? Detailed assumptions and quotes. So this is, whenever you make an assumption about something, say, we made an assumption about this based on the following, right? Based on some Google article we found, based on Wikipedia, based on a study published by the UN, right? They need to be able to understand the quality of your sources and the sources of your assumptions, right? So if you're making a lot of assumptions, that's okay. You're expected to be making a lot of assumptions. At the end of the day, you are trying to predict and mold the future, right? So there will be assumptions made. It's just important that you disclose what they are. And then finally, you want to do your financial plan. The same thing applies for your financial plan as it does for your sales targets and sales expectations, okay? Don't go crazy. Don't bullshit. Just don't bullshit. Keep it that simple. I know it's like nice to think that, you're going to keep doubling in growth for 30 years, but you're not, right? So don't bullshit. Keep it real, right? That's very, very important, right? Again, you're going to want to list details and assumptions. Don't overdo it with the details, okay? There's a fine line between office supplies and pencil expense, right? If you have pencil expense, the investors are going to think that you're trying to hide something by providing too much detail. Don't do it. Office expense is enough. As long as it's understandable to a layman, it should be understandable to them, right? Next thing you want to talk about is budgets, right? How are you setting your budgets? How are you spending them? How are you deciding whether or not something is worth doing, right? And you're going to want to talk about cash flow, right? In this case, cash flow is king. Right? If you have a business that is spending $99 and earning $100, you can keep that business alive indefinitely. Indefinitely, right? As long as the timing of those cash flows are the same, right? If you have to spend $99 to get $100 24 months from now, right? You have to have a way to survive for 24 months to claim that $100, right? And you have to have a way to guarantee that you're going to get it, right? So think about that. Think about cash flow and think about what you're telling your investors, right? And tell them the truth. Tell them the absolute truth, because at the end of the day, think about it this way. It's better, much better, to have your investor tell you that your plan is a piece of garbage, that there's no way this can do this, and you move on to the next investor, right? Another investor may embrace your plan and do it, but over time, you may see and you may feel when you're writing your business plan that your plan is actually not going to work because it's not congruent, right? Not all business ideas are great ideas. As a matter of fact, the majority of them fail, right? And they fail usually because of funding. So if you're seeing some problem in your funding, it's time to go back to the drawing board. And the sooner you realize this, the more time you have for your business. Remember, you are always on a clock, right? So the sooner you catch mistakes and adjust them, the better, right? The sooner you realize your business idea isn't quite up to par, that your customers aren't quite liking your idea, the faster you adapt, the more likely you are to be successful because you have a limited amount of time to execute and a limited amount of capital. Okay, next. So that's your business plan. That's your structure for your business plan, right? That's how you build it. That's how you put it together. In the future, hopefully I'll be posting stuff on Google Classroom, so, like samples of business plans, outlines for these lectures, notes, any kind of homeworks that you can do or quizzes that you can practice with. I haven't done that yet, but stay tuned. Every day we're working on improving the stream a little bit, right? So what is an effective written presentation? How do you make an effective written presentation, right? So, one, always remember, your plan does not equal your business. Okay, so I don't care how fancy your plan is, if your business sucks, it sucks. Okay, your plan could be the best plan in the world, unless you're in the business plan writing business, forget about it. All right? The next thing is insist on confidentiality. This doesn't mean signing a litany of paperwork or getting lawyers involved or anything like that. You could just ask for it. That's enough, right? We just like you to be confidential about this business while we're building it. That's good enough, right? Okay. You want to have good grammar. You want to have good grammar. If you have terrible grammar, get someone else to check it, right? That's it. It's that simple. Use Grammarly, use whatever you want, right? But get someone else to check your grammar, okay? Because you want to have good grammar. Because if you're not able to put things into good grammar on paper for asking for a boatload of money, you're probably not going to build a very good business, at least in the eyes of the investors, right? Okay, you want to keep things at a reasonable length. I know that there's a lot to talk about. I know there's a lot to cover. I know there's a lot that you want to say and a lot that you want to explain. Keep it at a reasonable length. Learn to say what you want to say in the shortest way possible, right? To communicate the ideas clearly and as effectively as possible. And you'll find that you're more clear and you're effective if you use less words, right? So make it a reasonable length. The reason you want to make it a reasonable length is that most investors receive at least 300 applications per year, right? And they only invest in 3 businesses. Okay? So they're reading about an application a day, right? If they're reading an application a day, and it's usually higher than that, and now it is, but if they're reading about an application a day and they're only investing in 3, then there's really 3 days that they're going to decide to invest, right? So if you're forcing them to read a 95-page document, they're probably not going to invest because they're not going to get through a 95-page document. There's just not enough time in anybody's life for that, okay? Next thing is you want to appear professional. Appear professional. Now, this has some caveats, okay? Appearing professional has some caveats. It doesn't mean that you take, okay, what is a professional business plan, and you put it in Google and you say, okay, well, this is how it looks and this is exactly what it is. If you're a digital marketing company or a web design studio or something like that, and you have an artsy side, or you have something that you feel will better communicate the attitude and the position of your team and your business, right, to an investor and help attract the correct investor, do it, okay? But do it professionally. Do it in a way that is easy to see, that is easy to understand, and that is easy to navigate, okay? What that means basically is please don't submit your business plan on loose leaf paper, right? I don't mean that you need to get it professionally bound at a bookstore, right? That's probably a waste of money and not going to tell your investor very much, but there is a middle ground. There is a middle ground, right? A suit is professional, okay? Showing up in a jockstrap is not, okay? So just keep it professional because you always want to understand where your audience is, okay? Is there any difference when your consumers are also the investors? Crowdfunding, for example. Yeah, absolutely. So there absolutely is a difference, right? So we're going to pause here, right? So at Appear Professional, and we're going to try to answer this question, right? So the only difference is the way you're going to raise money. So for example, from your consumers, right, something along the lines of Kickstarter, it's very unlikely that you'll get someone making a $100,000 or a $500,000 contribution, okay? Now, when you have consumers that are also your investors, right, you're actually merging the 2 branches, okay? You're merging the 2 branches, and they're actually very similar people, right? You should start thinking about your investors as your consumers. So an investor is your consumer because they're buying into your idea, right? They're buying into your idea. And they're a little bit more difficult to sell because they might actually need your solution, right? So for example, right, I saw on Kickstarter there was an auto pap machine that had no machine hooked up. It was just a nose cover thing, right? For example, or a board game or a video game or whatever it is that you're raising money for on Kickstarter. Usually your consumer, or in the separate scenario, your investor is not your consumer, right? Your investor is simply buying into the idea on the basis that you have someone to convince, right? When you merge the 2, it's actually a very positive thing because the people that you're convincing are the very people that need your product, right? So you have immediate product validation. You have immediate product validation, which means that you have product market fit. If people are interested in buying your product ahead of time, they're going to be interested in buying your product when it's out, right? So you've already demonstrated that. And if you can find some product validation along those lines, so for example, if you already have a business and you've pitched it to a customer, and the customer said, you know what, I'm willing to invest $1,000 in it, that is a huge deal, right? Because then they support your business, okay? So that's the first thing, right? So your investors and your consumers. The second thing that's important is that your consumers, regardless of the scenario of whether or not you're doing it together or separately, your consumers are investors in every sense of the word. 1, they're giving you money, right? 2, they're giving you feedback about your product, right? And 3, like we discussed before, when you first start a business, it's going to have problems. Inevitably, it's going to have problems. Whether or not you're manufacturing something, or as we see on Kickstarter, things are delayed, or things run over budget, or things take too long, or whatever it is, they're going to have to deal with those problems, right? And your consumers are going to be investing and staying with you regardless. So even if you got your money from somewhere else and you charge nothing from your consumers, right? Think about the stream as an example, okay? The people watching the stream are in a way my consumers, right? I keep the investor piece separate, right? So the investors are a different group of people, right? Sometimes they intersect, sometimes they don't. But in a way, every single one of you that's here with me, every single one of you that's watching, is investing in the future of this concept and in the future of this content, right? So somewhere deep inside, you know that perhaps my video quality isn't perfect, or the sound isn't perfect, or the setup isn't perfect, or anything, any number of things could be better, right? There's no doubt that any number of things could be better. But because you believe in a future, in what we're doing, right, you are in a way investing. You're investing your time, you're investing your attention, you're investing your support, and so you stay an investor, right? So doing something like Kickstarter, where you gather money, or crowdfunding, when you gather money from your consumers, right, in order to build your business, allows you to sidestep a lot of things because you already have product validation. You already have customers lined up. You have more predictable sources of revenue, right? And so it really does take away a lot of the risk, right? It's risk minimizing in a lot of senses. So it's important to think about consumers and investors as not totally separate things. So they could be perfectly merged, or you could just think about in broader terms about each of those people. So I hope I've answered your question. If I haven't, definitely let me know, or try to rephrase the question. I'll do my best to get it over to you. Okay, so the next piece, right? So, okay, you want to appear professional. This is pretty important, right? You also want to have solid evidence, right? So you want to have solid evidence. If you don't have solid evidence of what you're doing, it's nonsense, right? If the investor is like, well, how do you know that the market for cell phones is going to keep growing, right? And you say, well, my Uncle Bill is a cell phone salesman at the Verizon store, and he told me that that's what's going to happen. Okay, that's some bullshit evidence, okay? Don't bother with that. Try to get solid evidence. If you can't get solid evidence, just leave it out. Just leave it out. That's fine. That's fine. It's fine to leave it out. Let them speculate on what it is. Let them do the research, right? If it's critical to your company, find it. I don't care if you have to contact a professor, an industry leader, send an email to Bill Gates, whatever it is, do what you have to do. At least be able to tell them that you tried and you failed, right? Rather than you just omitted something. All right, so solid evidence, right? The next thing is you're going to want to talk in lay terms. All right, if you're opening a pizza shop, it doesn't get much easier than that to explain. We take in dough and ingredients and we make pizza. And so if you're doing it in lay terms, if you're doing something complex, right? If you're doing something complex, talk about it in simple terms. I know a lot of people have engineering backgrounds and physics backgrounds and all these things, and these things enable them to think more critically and in different ways about products and invent them in such ways, and they start using all kinds of lingo, right? Like, for example, for marketing, they start talking about SEO and CCP and QRT and whatever kind of acronyms you want to make up, right? Know your audience. Know your audience. If your investor doesn't understand what you're saying, they're not going to invest in the business. Okay, it's easier to not appear to be some kind of marketing or engineering genius, and instead just say, hey, we're building a machine that's going to convert water into gold, right? Rather than it's going to convert H2O through the anodization of atoms and so on and so forth, right? If you're applying for a research grant, that's a different story. But if you're applying for investment, most investors are good at evaluating risks and taking them, right? That's what they're good at. They're not good at pizza shops. They're not good at engineering. They're not good at a lot of other things, right? If they have a specialty, it's pretty narrow usually, right? So that's what they're going to be good at. So keep things in lay terms. Okay, emphasize your qualifications. Emphasize your qualifications. What I mean by that is you don't have to leave it in that one section where you talk about your management team, right? Spread it out. Spread it out through all the other sections, right? So if you're talking about your product and you've worked with these kinds of products before, talk about it. If you're talking about your customer segment and you were the lead marketer for reaching this specific customer segment 3 years ago at a major company and had some success, talk about it, right? You want to be able to basically get rid of as much risk as possible in the investor's eyes through your own skill set, right? Because the fact of the matter is, no matter how much they say they're going to help you out and do all these things, they have limited time, right? One, they are invested in a bunch of companies. Two, they're usually doing things like philanthropic work. And three, they usually just have other priorities, right? Like going to a basketball game, okay? So somebody that's willing to give you and take a risk with $200,000 has better things to do with their time than worry about how to find you a new marketing person, okay? So don't waste your time and emphasize your qualifications, okay? The next thing is analyze your market thoroughly. Analyze your market thoroughly. Right? So you need to understand your market inside and out. If you don't understand your market inside and out, you're screwed. Right? So if you come to an investor and you say, hey, I'd like to start an educational stream on Twitch. Right? And you didn't do any research, and you're like, well, I'd like $100,000 because that'll help me do it and hire some people and get some nice equipment and stuff, right? And then your investor goes, oh, actually, there's been about 30 people that have tried this and failed dismally, right? What makes you different? And you're like, well, I didn't actually know about those 30 people. Okay, you've lost the investment, all right? Understand your market. Understand your market completely inside and out better than your investor, because they're going to ask you questions about it. And if you can't answer them, you're screwed, because they're not going to be going out and doing the research, right? Again, like I said, if they're looking at 300 investment opportunities and selecting three, they're selecting the three that they feel most confident about succeeding. Not because you have a great idea, but because you have the capability to execute on that idea. Right? So when you understand your market, you understand your risk. And if you understand your risk, you understand what you're doing. Okay. The next thing is balance your financial statements. Okay? What that means is you can be optimistic, but talk about when you're being optimistic. To be fair, it's probably better to lean towards the pessimistic side, right? And take guidance from your investors. So if your investors say, hey, you should be a little bit more optimistic in your financial statements, don't say, no, we've done the research, we're right. Okay, be coachable, right? I'll just add that in here. It's not even in my notes, but be coachable, right? This is something that I've heard from a lot of investors personally. Be coachable. They like that, right? They like the fact that you're willing to take their advice. Because the reality is this is someone with 50 more years of experience than you in business, right? And business, quite frankly, never really changes. The means of business and the things that we do and the specific aspects of it change, but being coachable makes you able to adapt more quickly and more effectively, right? And it makes the investor feel a lot more confident that they can add a skill set that you may lack, right? So think about it this way. If you appear coachable to your investor and your investor says, they're looking at your business plan and you've appeared coachable, they say, you know what? They lack these things, but they look pretty coachable, so I think I can add them on. Right? That's fantastic. If you don't appear coachable, your investor is going to say, well, they lack these things. They don't look like they're very coachable, so I'll leave them out. Let them do it on their own. Okay? In terms of your financial statement, just returning to that for a second, err on the side of pessimism, really err on the side of realism. Note your assumptions and don't over-detail things. Don't over-detail things, right? I mean, don't include things like birth rates and population growth and stuff like that unless it's actually relevant to your business, right? Don't do it for the next 20 years, okay? It's hard enough predicting what's going to happen next month. Okay, it's hard enough. They're not going to believe, even if you have a great prediction for the next 20 years. They're not going to believe it, right? For all they know, nuclear war breaks out in 15 years. Okay? Or in 2 weeks. It's more likely in 15 years than it is in 2 weeks, and hopefully that probability is relatively small. But the reality is, you're not going to predict 20 years effectively. 5 years is great, right? 5 years is great. And the last 3 years, you want to do in low detail. So very kind of overall, and just noting the important stuff that you're going to do. Okay, so note it in low detail. 5 years is more than enough. 1 year of detail is more than enough, and don't overdo the detail. They don't need to know how much you're going to be spending on pencils and whether you're buying them from Staples or from Office Max. Unless you're pitching to Office Max, and in that case, obviously don't tell them that you're buying pencils from Staples. Okay, finally, and this is perhaps the biggest thing, is expose flaws. Expose flaws. If your investor thinks of a business flaw before you do, you've lost the investment. If you think of a business flaw that your investor didn't think of, you're going to win their investment, almost guaranteed. Almost, unless your business flaw is so critical that it's unfixable, you're going to win their investment because they understand that they are dealing with people that are professionals in what they do, right? That are professionals and that understand what they're doing. So expose your flaws and do it brutally. Do it brutally, because your ability to evaluate yourself, your investor isn't going to hold your hand, right? They're not going to sit at your desk and help you make decisions and help you do everything. They'll weigh in on difficult decisions and they'll help you out in tough times, right? But they're not going to be there every single day. And your ability to be self-critical, your ability to understand your flaws, your ability to understand and predict where problems will come from is going to give them peace of mind, and it's going to ensure your success. It's going to ensure your success because the only people that fail are the people that either fail to recognize that they're heading in a failing direction, right? Which means they're either losing money too fast or not reaching their customers or whatever, or they do recognize and they fail to change. If you communicate either of these things to your investor, that you will fail to recognize your problems or that you will fail to change once you do, you will lose their investment. Because the reality is 99% of your success as a startup, as your success as a new business, is going to depend on these things. If you open a pizza shop, as simple as a pizza shop, and everybody comes in and they're demanding pizza that doesn't have tomato sauce, and you have no way of making pizza that doesn't have tomato sauce, right? At first, you may not recognize it. But if you recognize it, if you don't find a way to start changing how your pizza is made, you're going to fail, okay? So be ready to change and communicate your ability to change and be coachable to your investors. All right, next. Presenting your plan. Okay, so oftentimes you'll have to do this in person. Presenting your plan. Okay. First thing about public speaking. Public speaking. Public speaking is not a talent. Public speaking is not a genius. Public speaking is not some innate ability. It's not. It's not something you're born with. It's not any of these things. None of them. Okay? Get that through your head and get it through your head 100%. You are going to be public speaking in your life several times and you're going to do it a lot. Do some people have an easier time? Yes. Do some people have more powerful voices? Yes. Do some people understand cadence better? Yes. Of course. Of course they do. But your ability to do public speaking and your ability to run a business are going to be very closely correlated because you're going to be speaking to suppliers. You're going to be speaking to customers. You're going to be speaking to employees, to investors, to friends about your business. You're going to be communicating all the time. And communication and public speaking is nothing but practice. It is a learned skill that you can master with time, and you should master if you plan on pursuing business. I don't care how shy you are. I don't care how difficult it seems. I don't care how worried you are that what people will think of you. None of that matters. The fact of the matter is that you will get better by practicing, okay? One of the best public speakers in business of our time was Steve Jobs, okay? Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, if any of you have seen Steve Jobs' presentation of iPhones and iPads and stuff like that, it truly is just a totally different experience. You just end up sucked into what and he's selling a product, right? He's just a salesman. He's selling you a product, but it's so fluid and it's so dynamic and it's so interesting and it's so real and it's so pure, right? And the reason it's so pure is that for weeks he would practice. And then for 48 hours, he would do it on stage. For 48 hours before he's presenting, he would go until every single thing was perfect. Do you need to approach it with such perfection? Probably not. That's probably overkill unless you're trying to be the very best at it, right? In which case, all the power to you. But the fact that preparation and practice works is 100%. 100% the truth, right? So that's the first concern about public speaking. I hear a lot of people, including my students, tell me they're worried about public speaking, they're concerned about it. That's not the case. It's a skill. You practice it, you get better, right? Just like anything else. You were probably worried about writing, right? And then now you're writing, right? You're probably worried about reading, and now you're reading, okay? Worry doesn't help you. Practice does, okay? So that's the first thing. When you're presenting, investors have short attention spans. Like I said before, it's a lot of things to look at, and it's a lot of decisions to make in a very short time, right? You've heard the old phrase that, you make a judgment about a person within the first 10 seconds of meeting them, right? And that's probably true about your business plan as well. So if your business plan arrives on loose leaf, it'll probably go right into the garbage, right? If your business plan arrives professionally bound and like, gold plated and stuff, it probably won't go into the garbage, but they'll probably take out all the gold and try to sell it because you obviously don't know how to manage your money, okay? So investors have short attention spans, so keep it short, right? Time yourself. Time yourself. This is critical. This is critical. You should aim for 5 time slots. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes. And importantly, you're not adding content in any of these things. You are adding depth. So you should be able to cover everything that you can cover in 15 minutes in 1 minute in front of an investor, right? Because an investor comes up to you. Imagine this. Imagine you're raising $1 million, okay? You're raising $1 million for the startup, and an investor calls you in after seeing your business plan and says, hey, come in and talk to me. And you show up, and they say, oh my God, some crisis just happened. I have exactly 1 minute. And you have a 15-minute speech prepared. You just lost out on a chance to get $1 million because you don't have a 1 minute speech prepared. Don't put yourself in that situation. Have a 1 minute speech. People call it an elevator speech. You can call it whatever you want. Time yourself. It'll give you a better understanding of how long you're talking, right? When you tell people to do a 5-minute presentation, they think that's forever. When you tell people to do a 2 to 3 minute presentation, they think that's too little time, okay? Time yourself and understand how quickly you speak. Understand how quickly you cover things. Understand how quickly you go over things. Understand what questions might come up, right? Understand how to manage those questions. That's very, very important. Next, practice until you're nauseous. Practice until nauseous. No, I don't actually know how to spell this word. Nauseous. Whatever. We'll pretend I spelled it right. Okay? Practice until nauseous. And what that means is very simply, you take down what you've written and you walk back and forth in your room and you do it. And you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it a 5th time, and you do it a 6th time. And if you have slides, you're doing it with slides, and you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. And if you're doing it in a high school auditorium, you call them up and you say, I'd like to come in, the day before my presentation and do it a couple times, and you do it again and again and again. Because you know what it leads to when you don't practice until you're nauseous is this. You're going to be standing in front of your presenter with the piece of paper in front of your face and going like this. Preparing the plan. Short attention span. Oh, right. I wanted to talk about short attention. That's a terrible presentation. No one's going to like it. No one's going to buy your product. No one's going to do anything until you practice, until you are nauseous, okay? And the reason is, once you practice until you're nauseous, you put down the piece of paper and you know exactly what you're going to talk about. You know exactly what you're going to cover, right? If you want to have pointers, right? If you want to have pointers, if you want to be able to glance at something like I do, right? This is a pretty long lecture, right? But I'm able to glance at it and say, okay, time yourself. What did I want to talk about here, right? Practice until nauseous. Okay, got it. That's what I want to talk about here, right? If you want to do that as an aid. If your presentation is long. However, if your presentation is 1 minute, 5 minutes, or 15 minutes, you should not need an aid, right? You should not need an aid because you're asking somebody to give you $1 million for your company. And if you don't know what the hell you're doing in your company, they're never going to give you $1 million. So know it by heart and know it perfectly, right? Know it perfectly. And the final thing is you want to learn to overcome resistance, right? Overcome resistance. And again, the only way to do this is practice, right? The most successful salespeople in the world, regardless of what they do, you know what they do? They play games, right? They play games with other salespeople, and they say, okay, but what if I said this, right? So, for example, I'm getting you to buy real estate. Well, I don't have enough money for a mortgage. Well, we could look at different financing options. There are a lot available. Have you considered FHA loans, right? Oh, no, I haven't. Okay, good. We've overcome that obstacle, right? Whatever the obstacle is, you have to learn to play with it. Oh, well, $1 million seems like a lot. Well, the reason we think $1 million is the correct amount to invest is because it gives us an 18-month span of time, right? And the plan that we've written here is for 9 months. So in the event that we have, too much money in this scenario, or our plan slows down, right? That sounds terrible. That sounds terrible. It sounds terrible because I'm thinking of it on the spot, right? It's not practice. The one I have about mortgages is practice because I've practiced it over time. So overcoming that resistance is like this, instant. You want to know that the person you're dealing with, if you're an investor, if you're a customer, whatever it is, you want them to know about you, that you are a professional and that you understand what you're doing, right? You understand the entire scope of what you're doing. Not just a piece, but the entire scope. And if you can overcome these resistances, you will have scope. So sit down with a friend and tell them to play the role of an investor and have them come up with problems. And don't just tell them, well, that's unrealistic. No, know the answer to every single problem they can come up with. Because the more unrealistic, the more ridiculous, the bigger they're going to cause a problem for you. So be prepared for all kinds of resistance to what you're doing. And be prepared with how you're going to overcome it when it happens. Okay, so some of the things that investors look for, okay, and don't look for, right? But investor perspective. Some of this is based on the book. Some of this is based on my own experience. Some of this is based on other people's experience that I've spoken to, right? Your market is more important than your product. If you have a very deep understanding of your market and the things that people need and how it's growing and how it functions and who has money and who doesn't, right? That's more important than the specific product, because you're going to be able to come up with many, 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 many more products, right? If your product is perfect, but your market is shrinking, or there's no money left in it, or there's too much competition, you're not going to succeed. No matter how perfect it is, the investor is not going to back you. They want to back you in terms of your market, right? The second thing is you have to establish credibility. This is what you're doing by being honest. This is what you're doing by explaining everything. This is what you're doing by exposing all of your flaws. Is you're establishing credibility, right? You want to have concrete estimates. Concrete and conservative. Don't tell your investors that you're worth $1 billion and the company is going to sell for $10 billion in 5 years because you're just a computer genius, right? Unless you've invented teleportation and can demonstrate it, it's probably pretty good to be conservative. Okay. Next. The next, tell the truth. Okay. Your investors are very skeptical. Think about it this way. They're skeptical enough to reject 297 business plans out of 300, right? That's like a 1% acceptance rate. Oops. That's like a 1% acceptance rate, right? So they're very skeptical. They're very skeptical, and so they're going to be even more skeptical when you ask them for a large amount of money. So be able to tell the truth. Next thing, don't participate in fortune telling. Okay? Nobody cares about what you think the future in 5 years will be. The fact of the matter is, you're terrible at predicting it, just as terrible as every single other person on the planet. If you were good at predicting the future, you would just buy lottery tickets. Okay? That's the reality. Yeah, sorry about that. I just shifted it back. Maybe I'll move it over just a little bit so it's more straight. Okay. And finally, this is not a legal document. This is not a legal document. You don't need to use long, impossible words. You don't need to make crazy disclosures about every single thing. You're not getting them to sign this thing, okay? So the simpler it is to read and understand, the better off you are, okay? My go-to is I use italics. I use boxes. And I use bold to highlight the things that are important, right? Think about the way most of your textbooks are written. Italics, boxes, bold. Right? So that you can skim through quickly and understand what you're doing. And then if you're interested, you can slow down. All right. So that's your investor perspective. Next, we're going to talk about some things that are total bullshit. I love that word, and we're going to keep saying it. Bullshit, bullshit, and bullshit. Okay, so some things that you're going to read in business plans and hopefully not put into your business plan, right? Because there's two things that you're fooling here. You could try to fool your investors, which is not going to work, and you could try to fool yourself, which might work, but for a limited amount of time, because eventually you'll fail, and then you'll realize that you fooled yourself, and it's not worth the time, okay? We conservatively project. That's bullshit. Just don't write it. Put your projection down. If you're writing that you're conservatively projecting, you're probably not conservatively projecting. We took our best guess and divided it by 2. Bullshit. Okay? Just put down your best guess. If your best guess is already divided by 2, keep it divided by 2. You don't have to indicate that. Alright? We project a 10% margin. Bullshit. You're not going to be making a 10% margin, right? You don't actually know what that is. It's just you had business plan software that said 10% and you were like, alright, well, we'll keep it at 10%. The project is 98% complete. That's bullshit, right? Most investors understand that if you're seeking funding, the remaining 2% is going to take as long as the first 98%. The business plan is proven. That's also bullshit. The business plan is printed on paper. Nothing about the business plan is proven. If your business is proven, that's a different story, and you shouldn't be seeking funding because you should be profitable. Okay? We have a 6-month lead on our competitors. The only thing that means is that you haven't researched your competition. Okay? We only need 10% of the market share. Bullshit again. So do the other 50 startups that are trying to do the same thing you are. Okay? They also only need 10%, but there's 50 of you. So not everyone's going to get it, obviously, right? There's customers beating down our door. Yeah, probably because you offer your product for free at an extreme discount, or you've asked them to just sign up for a newsletter, okay? A newsletter is not a sold product. A free product is not a sold product. If your product is sold for what it is, then they're beating down your door, okay? Otherwise, it's total bullshit. We're a low-cost producer. All that means is that you haven't evaluated all the costs, okay? If Heinz couldn't figure out how to be low cost, you can't figure out how to be low cost. If you have figured it out, you should just go to Heinz and work for them, all right? There's no competition in this industry. That's bullshit. Absolute bullshit. Again, unless you've invented teleportation, there's competition in the industry. And once you announce that you've invented it, there will be even more competition, okay? We have very experienced management. Unless you've run Google, Facebook, Twitter, or some multinational Fortune 500 company, you're not experienced management. One of the reasons you're seeking out your investor is because they are experienced at management. Okay? Investors are considering our plan. Yeah, no shit. If you've mailed it to 100 people, 100 people are considering it at some point, right? If you've got an active lead, disclose it to your investor. If your active lead is just someone's email and someone you send it to and they said, okay, I'll look this over when I have a chance, that's not an active lead. Don't lie to your investors. We are we're seeking a value-added investor. What that means is an investor that's willing to participate and just put in some cash and kind of lean back and see what's happening. That's bullshit. What you're looking for is an investor that just gives you money and doesn't ask questions, right? So in reality, what you're looking for is a dummy. If you tell your investor that what you're looking for is a dummy, they're not going to invest because they're not a dummy, okay? And words like, you will earn a 68% return. Yeah, bullshit. If you ever get your money back, you may earn a return. Okay, but more than likely you won't get your money back, and investors know that better than everyone, because this might be your first business, maybe your fifth, but this is their 50th, 60th, 70th investment, right? They have way more experience than you do in this. So don't bullshit your investors. It's a bad place to start. It's a bad way to do business. It's an impossible way to succeed, and it's going to lead you to waste your precious time not delivering your solution. Put your customers first. The longer you lie to investors, the worse off they are. Keep your investors in mind too. They are people, and they are, more importantly, they are your assets. And if you make them your assets, if you tell them the truth, if you communicate with them honestly, you are going to move quickly and you are going to succeed. Otherwise, you will simply keep running into problems. We are running out of marker, but there's only like 2 more things to cover. Don't use software outside of like ideas, okay? So there's like Business Planner Pro and all this stuff, right? Don't use it. Don't use it. Don't use it no matter what. Just don't use it. Why? Because it produces these 85-page structured business plans. You're going to be one of 500 people submitting the same exact garbage, okay? So don't use it. If you want to come up with some ideas, if you want to see if you've answered some questions, if you want a general format, sure. But don't use the software and just submit software, because they know what the software looks like, right? A lot of people are using it. Don't use it. Just put it together. If you can't put a business plan together, you can't put a business together, okay? So put the business plan together and do it yourself, all right? Get help. Get help. Get mentors. Reach out to them. People want to help. Think about it this way. Think about yourself. What if you succeed at what you want to do? What if you succeed at teaching or learning or being a good friend or whatever it is? Would you want to help others do the same? You would, right? You would. So do other people. Okay? That's just the reality. So get help. Send them an email. Worst case scenario, they say no, you're back at square one. Okay? You've wasted an email, right? Emails don't cost any money, so just send emails and be like, hey, I need your help, right? Also, remember to reach out to the Small Business Administration. They have resources. They have people available that are willing to help. Find nonprofit organizations like the Service Corps of Retired Executives, or SCORE. Again, that's the Service Corps of Retired Executives, right? If you want to reach out to them, they will help you, right? If they find the time, they will help you. If your business idea is compelling, they will help you more, and they will find you more people to help. Get help. Get help. Understand your weaknesses. One of your weaknesses is that you haven't started 25 businesses. If you have, you're not watching a class on how to start businesses, right? So learn about that. And then finally, remember, the most important thing about business plan, the purpose. The purpose. We've come to answer the question. The purpose of a business plan is the process. It is the process of going through these steps. It is the process of identifying your risks. It is the process of thinking about your team. It is the process of measuring your capital and finding out how much you're going to make. It's the process of avoiding the bullshit and putting things under more scrutiny. It's the process of learning about your industry, thinking about your marketing, your distribution, your product, your customers. The process is what's important. So don't just sit down, put together a business plan, and call it a day. Your business plan will be ever evolving. As a matter of fact, the biggest wisdom about business plans is that the second they come out of the printer, they are obsolete. And that couldn't be more true, because every second, what you're putting in the business plan should be changing. It should be changing. It should be getting better. You should be improving it. You should be thinking about how to communicate it more clearly, what you've learned, and integrating that. Your process. And this whole process, this business plan, is really, really the foundation of how you're going to build your business. And that's why it's not as important to put it on paper. It's not as important to print it out and bind it. If you are going through this process in your mind constantly, if you're thinking about these things about your business, you are going to succeed, right? So the purpose of the business plan is the process, not the document, but how you go through it.